The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. All right. Hello, guys. Welcome to this special edition of the IMG Roadmap podcast. As you know, I interview successful IMGs who are doing great things out in the world, just saving lives. Today on the podcast, though, I have a very special guest, very dear friend of mine who I made over the last year. Her name is Dr. Raissa Fobi. And actually, guys, I wanted to introduce herself. So I wanted to tell us about herself because I think you need to hear from her. She's a pediatrician, neonatologist out in the Washington State area. So Dr. Fobi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nina. Thank you so much. It's so good to be on. I'm so honored.
Well, you are phenomenal. Of course, you are a co-author of Beyond Challenges.
Yes, we did that.
Yes, which is a book that we both wrote, and it's survival stories of immigrant physicians about love, life, and the practice of medicine. But I'd like you to tell us about yourself, maybe focusing on where you trained, what really makes you an IMG, and where you're at right now.
Oh, thanks, Nina. So my name is Raissa Fobi, like Nina said, and I am a physician. I am a single mom. I'm a blogger as well as a public speaker. And I like to think of myself as someone who loves God, who loves running, and who just loves her family. What makes me an IMG? I went to medical school in the University of Ghana in West Africa. For those of you who are not familiar with where Ghana is, I went to medical school there after having done a 3-year undergrad in South Africa. So I kind of went all over the place. So I was 3 years in South Africa. I did a BSc in human physiology, knowing all along that I wanted to do medicine, and I wasn't able to get into medical school in South Africa because of the quota for Black students they had. So then I applied, got into medical school in Ghana, and then completed medical school there. Then after that, I ended up spending another 2 years after that just sort of working in the medical system. I did a 6-month rotation as an intern or a house officer, as they call it, in each department. So 6 months in pediatrics, 6 months in OBGYN, 6 months internal medicine, and 6 months in surgery, general surgery. And then through that process, I sort of completed my steps, step 1, step 2, and step 3, with the goal of getting me to the United States. I eventually immigrated in 2011, did my pediatric residency in New York at the Columbia affiliate at Harlem Hospital. And then after that, did a neonatology fellowship in California in UC Irvine. So a bit all over the place, but I think that circuitous path brought me to where I am today.
That is so phenomenal. I mean, that's super awesome. I think one thing that stood out to me was you said that you actually did your USMLE exams while you were still in South Africa. Is that right? Can you tell us about how you prepared for that?
So I think the benefit of knowing what you want to do early gives you time to figure the process out, right? So for me, medicine was something I was always passionate about. And when I initially started applying for medical school, I did apply in the States. I initially got in, but the schools, the fees were very expensive, and my family was unable to afford it at the time. And my mom, we started looking for more affordable options. So in that process, I got into medical school in Ghana. And while I was in Ghana is where I actually started doing the USMLEs. So I took the steps at the sort of equivalent time of medical school where I would have taken them if I were doing medical school in the States. And I chose to do it that way because what I was learning alongside sort of matched what the step required me to learn and take the exam. And I think for me, that was the greatest benefit in doing it alongside at the same time, because then I could get good scores and get into the residency, at least compete on a somewhat equal level with the US medical grads when I was looking for residencies.
Right. That is so amazing. So I think what I'm hearing is you had a plan from the very beginning. You didn't just stumble upon this path. once you figured out where you wanted to be, you started to work your way backward to identify what you needed to do. I think a lot of IMGs, what I've noticed is they wait until the end to study for the STEP exams instead
Exactly.
of incorporating it into their curriculum, especially for those that are located in non-Caribbean schools. And I really like that you are a perfect example of someone who followed the pathway and figured out, hey, what would be my equivalent of a second year medical student? What point does that correlate with where I'm at so I can take step one? And then what, when I'm doing
Exactly.
clinicals, what correlates with when to take step two? And really kind of working alongside of your current medical school curriculum really makes a difference. Would you agree?
I completely agree, Nina. And the benefit goes both ways because not only am I gaining or at least going through the steps I need to go through to be able to practice in the United States, I'm actually also learning medicine the way that students here learn medicine. But at the same time, I was using it to help me understand what I was actually learning in my actual medical school and made me understand it even better because in that system, in the at least I would speak for my medical school, the teachers are great, but there's a lot of self-learning that has to happen. Whereas when I was using the USMLE books to study, there's a lot of mnemonics, there's a lot of remember this with this. There's a lot of lists that just make the learning process easier. So they kind of helped each other out, which was great in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Wow. So, one thing that stood out to me when you were telling us about where you trained, I mean, most IMGs are always worried about where they're potentially going to train. And I want you to touch a little bit on what made you competitive enough to match pediatrics at a Columbia affiliate, or what made you competitive enough to match into fellowship at a UCLA hospital. I mean, because those are big names, right? And
Right.
most of us sort of like to encroach on those names, maybe to give ourselves a higher opportunity, whether in academics or in the marketplace.
So I am a very big believer of success is preparation meeting opportunity. And those two go so beautifully hand in hand. And when I look back and I actually talked to my mentor in pediatrics after having gotten into the residency program, he told me categorically that it was my step one scores that sort of stood out to the people who were looking. And in addition to that, what I had done afterwards, because I didn't straight away come out of a medical school and go start applying into residencies immediately. I worked for 2 years and kind of just worked in every department. I did C-sections, I did circumcisions, just kind of worked around to figure out if my passion was truly pediatrics. His response to me was that those were the two things that stood out. So that was from his end. From my end, when I was looking in preparing for medical school and to make me competitive, studying the way I studied for the step ones, I also looked at where to apply. So looking across the United States, talking to different people, doing my research online, I found out that the most IMG friendly programs at the time, anyway, were mostly East Coast based. So I focused all my initial applications, meaning my pediatric residency applications, all on the East Coast. I did over 40 applications and they were all on the East Coast. And in all those 40 applications, I honestly got just one interview. And that floored me. I was so destroyed. I was so disappointed, but I still pull myself up by my bootstraps. I'm like, I'm still going to go for this interview. I'm going to give it my all because I know that this is exactly what I want to do. And I went there and my interview comprised of a clinical scenario. And it was really just a discussion. And he was asking me questions as we were going along. What would you do? What would you do? What's your differential diagnosis? And I could literally see the lists in my head of all the things I'd been studying. My questions were very step one based. So I think that's what made me more, at least lucky, if you had to pick a word, or slightly more competitive to be able to get that program. And I am not one who did all my steps before applying for residency. I did my step one, my step two, CS and CK. I ended up doing my step three in residency, and I did it in my second to third year of residency. And again, my research showed me, and I did it that way particularly again because the step three is more of an exam that requires you to transition into a sole decision-making role, which is really what the third year of residency is. So I kind of waited till I did that. I try to do the steps alongside with where I was in my training. So I think those tips sort of benefited me through my path.
Right. I agree 100%. So another thing I wanted to just touch on, you said, your mentor told you this question. Did you have a mentor while you were still in Ghana, a mentor that was trained in the US that could guide you? Because it's rare for people to make those choices to take step one while still enrolled in a foreign medical school that's a non-Caribbean school.
And that's very true, actually. I didn't have, well, I would say my aunt was my mentor in that sense because and I'm not necessarily calling her my mentor from the get-go because I sought out questions. I asked her questions. I said, this is sort of what I'm thinking. This is what I'm trying to do. I want to take the steps. I want to take it here. And she would say, well, maybe wait a couple months and try to take it within these few months. It's better if you do it here as opposed to this location, stuff like that. So she gave me the United States perspective of it. But I think the driving force and the inquisitiveness came from my end. So I didn't have a mentor per se when I was actually going through the process of trying to figure this out. My mom did a lot of research and pushing with me as I asked the questions. So she helped me figure it out. But I didn't have a mentor through the process. I just kind of saw the end of the tunnel. I was like, I need to get there. Just let me figure out how to get there.
Right. So you did a lot of personal research, whether that was on the internet, talking to people. You did not just, fall prey of maybe forums and stuff. You did your own research is really what I'm hearing.
Yes, for sure. For 100%. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that I want anybody listening to take home with them is a lot of what we're talking about, you can find on the internet. You can do just in-depth research, AMA, ECFMG, all these websites. You really have very clear-cut information for IMG. So another thing I wanted us to touch on is if you don't mind, because your mentor did recommend or did advise you that maybe your step one score had a lot to play, what would you say is an ideal score? I mean, I don't know if you feel comfortable disclosing that, but what would you say should be a ballpark range for a person that's interested in Peds?
Right. So at the time, if I think I remember, at the time, my score was probably, I want to say it was 220, something, 228, 230. So generally speaking, right, there's some residencies, of course, that are hardest to get into. But pediatrics, whatever you do, your step one score should be the highest, in my opinion, right? Because that shows a basic understanding of just medicine and physiology. So if you compare yourself, on average, international medical students have a lower score than US medical grads. But I would say to aim for a score that a US medical grad will have, as opposed to aim for a score that an international medical student would have. Because that way, that's who you're competing against, right? Because that's who you're trying to get into school with. So nowadays, average scores will be at the 230s, 240s. And if you get anywhere above 210, you're still very competitive.
Okay. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that's usually one of the most common questions that I get is, hey, doc, what score do I need to get to match US residency? But it varies according to specialties, just like you said. But what we really want to focus on is being competitive enough for whatever you're applying, meaning you don't want to be average. You want to just go a little bit over average. Another great place for people to find the average scores of previous applicants that matched into whatever specialty that you're interested in is the NMRP's website. They actually publish annual data regarding this. And so if you're wondering, hey, what was the average score of people that matched plastic surgery last year? You can find that. And it's broken down for IMGs, non-IMGs, US IMGs, non-US IMGs. So it really gives you doctor-specific data as to who all is applying and who is matching and what scores that they get for those that match. So that's just a great resource I want to share with everyone. So as we closely wrap up here, we like to stay focused on the IMG roadmap, giving people some strong tips, strong advice. What are some key points, key take-home points now as an attending neonatologist? Oh, actually, I wanted to talk about how to get into neonatology, but what are some key take-home points regarding this whole process?
So the one thing, it might sound super cliched, but do not give up. I don't know how else to say it. You miss 100% of the shots you do not take. So just keep taking the shots. I applied to over 40 programs. I got one interview, and it was that one interview that gave me the shot that I needed. So don't give up. That's the first thing. The second thing, like Nina pointed out, be diligent with your research, be focused, be specific about what you want, and just keep digging till you get it. And yeah, reach out to people, talk, find out about their experiences, find out if they know people at different programs that can put in a word for you, stuff like that. And I think having a plan beyond getting into residency sort of also keeps the dream alive, if I have to say. So once you get into residency, what are you going to do? Yes, you'll celebrate. Yes, you'll jump. But then how are you going to proceed? What do you want to do with that afterward? What kind of resident are you going to be? Do you want to be the chief resident? Stuff like that. If you have a plan beyond residency, which you can talk about at the interview, that makes you seem more knowledgeable and more focused about where you're going.
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much. Now, let's talk neonatology. Is that a competitive specialty for IMGs as well? What are your thoughts on that? Because I mean, I may have different, I don't have much of a perspective being a non-pediatrician, but what are your thoughts on someone maybe listening to this and they may think, wow, that's interesting. What does she do? What is that really about? And how does an IMG get to be a neonatologist?
Right. So a neonatologist is a subspecialist, and I just take care of newborn babies and premature babies who are sick, who require ICU care. And it's from term newborns, meaning babies born at 40 weeks all the way down to 23 weeks of gestation. So it is a competitive field, and how you get into it is you get into residency and as into pediatric residency, that is. And as you are in pediatric residency, as you go through those rotations, neonatology is a big part of those rotations. So I think you do about 6 to 8 weeks in your first year. You do another 8 weeks in your second year, and then you do another 4 weeks in your third year. So as you do those rotations, if you are interested in it, make sure that you are showing the interest. You make sure you're excelling in that particular rotation, and your in-service exam scores are reflecting those. And again, it comes back down to if you know you want to do neonatology, where are you going to go train? Neonatology is a very small field. Everyone knows everybody. Every single body knows everybody. So if one neonatologist gives you a recommendation, trust me, you'll get into where you're trying to go. That's why I said be very purposeful about the NICU rotations you're on, because my NICU rotation that I was on, I remember very clearly she was the department head at the time, as well as the attending neonatologist and medical director in the NICU, Dr. Marin. She's the one who wrote my first recommendation letter and in fact made calls for me. And she was like, you have to take this girl. She's excellent. She's this, and she's this. Without those calls, I don't think I would have gotten into the interviews I got, because at the time I wanted to move to California. Again, highly competitive for IMGs. And I ended up getting about 6 interviews all on the West Coast because she made those calls and she wrote those recommendation letters. So be focused about those rotations. They do mean a lot. Neonatologists we're very particular about our babies. We're very territorial. So if you come in and you mess up, that's not a great thing. If you come in and you excel, trust me, you'll be spoken highly of.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah. And just to clarify, those who had questions, the NICU is the neonatal intensive care unit, and the ITEs is the in-training exams are exams that residents take midway during residency. So just some final words. We know that you were recently a co-author of Beyond Challenges. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So I went to ACPA, that's the Association for Cameroonian Physicians in the Americas. They had their annual conference last year. Went there, met this awesome group of ladies. We sort of started sharing our stories. And Nina, right here, this doctor that hosts this podcast, she came up with the idea of, putting this together in a book. And we got together, 15, kind of boiled down to 15 ladies, and put the book together. She was one of the biggest champions of just kind of pushing us and driving us and compiling and talking to the publishers. So anywho, the whole process, we finally published the book. The official release was October of this year, October 7th in Washington, D.C. And it was an excellent success. I mean, the process for me, writing the book was very cathartic. Going through planning the event and the launch was just so inspirational. And right now I feel like there's a 2.0 version coming. There's a second life that needs to be birthed from this. Right. So it's just all exciting. Yes, it's very exciting times.
That's awesome. So where can we find you? Because after this interview, you've given us so much insight. But if we want more information, if we want to follow your journey, if we want to ask you questions, where can we find you?
So you can find me on my website, www.thefobidoctors.com. And on there, all my socials are there: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything is on there. And yeah, www.thefobidoctors.com.
Okay. And I'll just spell that out for anyone who's taking notes. That's THEFOBI doctors.com. So thefobidoctors.com. All right.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes.
so much, Dr. Fobi.
Thank
We'll
you,
be
Nina.
in contact with you. And thank you for joining us. You have a great, great rest of your day.
You too, Nina. Thank you for doing this and thank you for having me on. It's been such a pleasure.
You're very welcome.